Here is Serbia. Whether it is a war, sanctions, Kosovo, it mostly works the same way. People say the crisis in Serbia, it is not the crisis, it is simply Serbia. My students adore counting how many Serbia are there in the Balkans, in Bulgaria, and everywhere in Europe. If I took this quotation, it is from a refugee in Belgrade. It is because in a very nice way, it mixes three powerful messages. So the omnipresence and the multiplicity of crises in the Balkans, the systemic affinity between migration and crisis, and the embeddedness of crisis in the national, regional, ethnic, etc. identities. Next, please. Quite ambitious, I would say, article with a triple objective, so for theoretical innovations in almost all, let's say, parts. I developed quite a new, let's say, innovative idea of crisis, which I apply in this article, let's say, to migration. So based on that one original typology of Balkan migration crisis, and of course, let's say, how to go beyond the crisis and also to measure the potential, the crisis potential versus the anti-crisis potential. Next, please. Conceptualizing the crisis very, very rapidly, so that it has been developed in a variety of articles. Here I would summarize, let's say, my major idea with a very provocative statement. If the crisis did not exist, they would have been invented by populist leaders. In the original, it is post-communist leaders, but not to make it too complicated for a very short presentation, I'm replacing here with the populist leaders, so that you do see it is. I rephrase Sartre's famous statement, if the Jews did not exist, they would have been invented by anti-Semites. So the question, of course, is why to create crises when there are so many other crises. Next slide. In 5 minutes, you will not have, of course, the answer, but let's say just to compare the two crises. So the first is what the two migration types of crisis, so that the first is the so-called classic crisis, which is very clearly expressed in unprecedented increase in migration flows and institutional incapacity of managing them. And the other one is almost the opposite, so that not so many objective but mainly symbolic characteristic, very liquefied temporality, because the first one there is a beginning, top and end, more or less, while this one, okay, so could emerge at whatever time, and it is expressed in, let's say, the agency is also different, not anymore the institutions, but populist leaders who create migration crisis where objectively there is no decrease of migration flows, but increase of populist discourses. Next. So how to cover it is extremely ambitious to cover the whole region, so that a typological entry, let's say, for mapping the migration profile of the region, I choose the very famous and insightful typology of temporalities of Fernand Braudel, which I apply, let's say, to migration, and of course to Balkan migration, and it allows to see a very changing profile of the region according to the temporality zoom you apply. So both the migration profile and the dominant type of migration change according to the temporality lens you apply. Yeah, next slide. So here is the summary, the conclusion, so that I make a distinction between 4 different migration crises, the 3 of them, and I of course distinguish according to temporality, origin, destination, so nationality of migrants, etc. But the 3 are expression of those objectives, so classic normal crisis. The 4th one is the populist, or what I call post-democratic crisis. Next. When there is crisis, there should be post-crisis, so that, and of course, post-crisis management, and so that I develop this part with 2 completely different approaches and cases. So the first is extremely interesting case of the policy on foreign fighters repatriation in Kosovo. Extremely interesting. In 5 minutes, we do not enter into any details. Why did I take it? Because it is one of the very rare cases of reversed, let's say, situation of lessons learned. So normally, okay, so EU preaches, or international organizations, let's say, preach how to do migration, migration, integration, and all the other policies. This example, very small one from a very small country and on a very, very, very specific, let's say, type of returnees, so that is an opposite case, because Kosovo dared, very small country of Kosovo dared doing, let's say, with the former foreign fighters, what almost any West European countries didn't, and because of that, all Western European countries and European institutions observe, let's say, this policy experiment. Next slide, and I'm going to end very soon, of course. The second, of course, approach of how to go beyond crisis, and I'm very happy to share that, that the major policy innovation the last years, especially in Western Balkans, much less so in Eastern Balkans, is the implementation of the policy of the migration development nexus. Engage, enable, empower is a very beautiful summary. It is the slogan, I would say, of the Albanian policy, but all those, they are institutional, legal, different types of policy innovations, but they all express, let's say, this idea of policy engagement, so that policy contribution, or the contribution of the diaspora to the development of the country of origin, and they illustrate this major policy ambition to change the migration profile of the Balkans. So Teresa likes to have a changing narrative. So the major aim of this policy innovation is to change the narrative and to change the image of Western Balkans from forced migrations or from migration crisis to migration and development nexus. So that's why I would not say they're extremely efficient in terms of outcomes, but in terms of really a new, let's say, type of policy and a very ambitious project of changing the narrative. They are really extremely interesting. And I'm going to conclude, so that very detailed conclusion I will not develop here. So next slide, I'll summarize. So the Balkans remain a torn country, so that facing opposite trends. So migration crises, several of them and different types. So not only migration flows, but also those constructive crises versus the migration development nexus. okay, those two types of crises, so that we have at least one of them at any moment, and these two different images. So securitized migration as a national threat and ontological, connected to ontological insecurity, versus migration connected to reconstruction, post-conflict reconstruction, prosperity, integration, and development of the region. And the real last one, which goes, the real last one, which goes beyond the conclusion and also beyond the article, but I'm an art fan, and I would like, let's say, to offer a small gift, symbolic art gift to everybody, to the audience, so that these are photos from a teacher in Sarajevo, who one day or several days started seeing refugees, let's say, crossing the street, and so that she got inspired of taking pictures and publishing on Instagram, and she got a great success. And with these beautiful pictures of amateur photographer, so that I would like to close this very short presentation. Thank you.